Big Country Politics on KTAB continues.
Well, hello and welcome to this week's Sunday Conversation here on Big Country Politics. I am Manny Diaz. This week we're joined by our special guest from Washington, D.C. He is our correspondent from The Hill. He's a staff writer from thehill.com, Daniel Visè. Daniel, thanks so much for making time for us.
My pleasure, sir.
Yeah, well, you wrote some pretty interesting pieces here recently regarding how high school boys are trending to be more conservative and how Americans are hiding their credit card debt. We're going to get in. We're going to tackle both of these issues here and these particular pieces that you wrote. But first, let's get to certainly how young boys are certainly trending more towards conservatism there. What spawned, what kind of came into your mind, inspired you to write this particular piece?
Yeah, as my article says, I kind of found it on either Reddit or Twitter, this chart that looked like wow, like most high school boys are conservative. Wow, I didn't know that. And so I clicked on it, and it turned out it's from this book by this woman named Jean Twenge, who's a scholar out in California, and she did this book about different generations, and there's this chart. And the reason it kind of, blew my mind a little bit is that I was under the impression that we've been reading that young people are generally liberal and getting more liberal, right? Nobody really talks all that much about men versus women, but what we keep reading and hearing is that young people are getting more and more liberal. So this kind of surprised me.
One interesting stat, and of course we can read a lot more of these stats here in the piece, but 12th grade boys are twice as likely to identify as conservative versus liberal, according to a respected federal survey of American youth. Now, Daniel, you said you have a 19-year-old boy. You don't look like you have a 19-year-old son, but you do. But tell me kind of like from his point of view and certainly kind of some of the findings that you found in all this.
I mean, I wish he were here. He's got an internship this summer, but what he told me, and I think this rings true, is that if you've got a high school age boy, a son, most of them aren't political one way or the other. In fact, this very survey, which is administered by the University of Michigan, the largest group of guys, which is like 2/5 of them, said nothing, zero. I'm not political. But this is the important part, is that the kids who do identify as liberal or conservative at 12th grade, this is the group they were talking to, is that they were twice as likely to say they're conservative as to say they were liberal, 25% versus about 13%. And that's significant. I mean, that's a big group of guys who are saying, yeah, I identify with conservatism.
Now, another probably influential figure in this has to be, probably some of the ones that we were talking about earlier, Andrew Tate, Ben Shapiro, along with some of these others. Andrew Tate, some of his quotes are, if you are over 15 and like cartoons, you are a loser, anime, Dragon Ball Z, etc., no excuse. Plus, any woman loses respect for you. Grow up. That's an Andrew Tate quote. And so this is the kind of guy that, and certainly a lot of like that 18 to, I'd say, mid-20s, probably really kind of, you can see more and more, males gravitating to him at that particular age. Another quote is, read the Bible. Every single man had multiple wives. Not a single woman had multiple husbands. It's against the will of God. It's disgusting. Some of his stuff, it's like, okay, well, a lot of people can, a majority of people can get on board. Others, it's like, where's he coming from in all this? Certainly, tell me about the figures that you've kind of experienced, when talking to some of these young people and who certainly they follow when it comes to this.
Well, I interviewed a number of young guys for this article, and I talked to my son too. And I heard consistently that guys who are in high school, they're gamers, a lot of them. They're on computers all the time. These are the guy you hear like yelling at his computer up in his bedroom, right? And they're on YouTube a lot of the time watching gaming related content. And more than one guy told me that if you're doing that, if you're part of that universe, you do tend to get sucked into this kind of wormhole of conservative ideology. What happens is you'll be watching a video about Star Wars movies ranked, right? And then it ends. And then after that, if you don't touch the button, it segues into how women destroyed Star Wars, or something that's starting to get into masculinity issues or maybe conservatism. The guys I talked to who are young guys, said that if you're on YouTube and you're a guy, you're gonna eventually be confronted with content from maybe PragerU or Ben Shapiro, that kind of stuff. And it's hard to say why this is. It's the bots on YouTube or whatever, but that's not the entire story. There's other stuff at work. Guys in the late part of the last decade, a lot of young guys identified with Donald Trump and his messaging. Again, these are guys I interviewed, said, if you were a high school kid in 2016, 2017, if you're a guy, Donald Trump might have very well have been your president, because he spoke in ways that kind of sounded like how guys talk, like young guys, like even in high school. For better or worse, depending on your perspective, a lot of high school guys really identified with his messaging. So that's another big issue, which would, because the big rise in young guys being conservative was over during those years, the Donald Trump years.
Was it shocking to see, that so much was leaning in towards that conservative arena?
Well, shocking only because there's so many articles out there that say young people are liberal. Young adults are liberal, kids are liberal, everybody's getting liberal if they're young. And it's true for women. Women are overwhelmingly getting more and more liberal for a lot of the same reasons. Donald Trump, the Dobbs decision, the Supreme Court decision that removed abortion as a constitutional right, politicized a lot of young women to the left. And I don't know about abortion per se, but the Donald Trump era politicized a good number of young guys to the right. Guys like adults, young adult men, are pretty flat in their politics. They're not generally trending more conservative or more liberal. Women are. They're getting more left. Guys are pretty flat. But these high school boys have been moving more to the conservative side in the last several years. It's undeniable.
We're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, more on Americans and hiding their credit card debt. This is another interesting piece that Daniel put together there on thehill.com. You can read more about that there. That and more on our Sunday conversation right here on Big Country Politics.
Big Country Politics on KTAB continues.
Well, welcome back to Big Country Politics. This is our Sunday conversation. This week we are joined by the staff writer from thehill.com, one of our next star brethren, Daniel Visè. Daniel, we were talking in our first segment about a piece that you wrote regarding high school boys and how they're trending conservative. Interesting topic there. Next, let's talk about how Americans are hiding their credit card debt. This is another piece. It was very extensive, very detailed. Tell us the influence and how you kind of stumbled upon this here.
Well, I'm fascinated with credit cards because credit card rates are at an all-time high, I think maybe ever. If you get a new card, the average rate now is going to be over 20%. And whereas like a few years ago, we all know interest rates were low and credit card rates were relatively low. I remember having the last credit card that I got before all the interest rate stuff happened was like, 12% or something. But they're getting kind of scary high. So I was kind of on the lookout for how that was going to affect people. And what I found was a number of surveys, but I focused on one that said that they interviewed enough people to figure out that a lot of us are just basically hiding the fact that we have credit card debt, not telling our partner, like husband, wife, whatever, not telling loved ones that we have credit card debt.
In the piece, the nation's credit card balance, you said, hovers around $1 trillion.
Trillion, yep.
Yeah, with the T, with the typical American household carrying around $10,000 in credit card debt, according to Wallet Hub. You mentioned opening up to a significant other, and certainly that also had to do with a generational thing, because there was also made mention of 63% of Generation Z and 58% of millennials said that they lied or withheld financial details, compared to Generation X was in the baby boomers there. Tell us a little bit about that and what you found there.
Well, I think, first of all, I think that credit card debt is something people are ashamed of generally, because it kind of suggests impulse buying. It suggests you lack discipline. It suggests that you're not the wisest financial customer, because think about all the different ways you can get money. I mean, you can spend money that you've earned, right? And then you can borrow money. And if you borrow money, you look smart if you borrow money at a good interest rate. And credit cards just don't have the best interest rates generally, right? They're at the high end of interest rates. So if you compare it to, like, think about your neighbor who refinanced their house at like an incredible rate, like 3%, like 5 years ago or something. People go around, my neighbors go around bragging about that. I have a neighbor the other day who was bragging about how, yeah, just before the rates went up, man, I got my house refinanced at like 2 point something. And like, you look smart if you do that, right? But if you took out a credit card over the last year at 20% interest, you don't want to go brag to your neighbors about that because it looks bad. It looks like a bad decision, right? And that's what I was kind of writing about.
Another poll from Bankrate found that 35% of adults carrying credit card debt from month to month. Of that group, 2/5 said they didn't know how much interest they were paying. How scary is that, that folks don't know the impact of interest and the whole month to month and how that carries over?
Well, speaking for myself, it took me until pretty far into my adult life before I gained any kind of discipline about credit cards. I mean, you live and learn, you take your lumps. And a lot of younger people, getting to your earlier point, a lot of younger people don't yet have the discipline about credit cards. Maybe they don't even remember that the rate is variable. Maybe they don't look at the rate. I don't think the rate is usually advertised like in huge numbers on your statement when you get it. So it's easy to just forget about it. And if you know it's high and it's scary, you don't maybe want to know about it. And so it doesn't surprise me to hear that people lose track of what the rate is that they're paying on their card. And remember, if you had your card from 2 years ago, the rate is almost certainly higher now. So you should figure out what it is. And then, you know this, any of us who have had a credit card with a serious interest rate, that if you pay a low amount every month, it's very easy for the balance to just sort of creep up without you even realize it's happening. And this gets to, I think, part of why, like, maybe some more younger people are a little less likely to be honest, maybe with a partner or with a parent about credit card debt, because it's just, they're embarrassed about it. It makes them look like they're not disciplined, which perhaps they are. And it sometimes takes until you are that parent before you're old enough that you've been through there, you've been like burned by credit card debt, and you learn to avoid it if you can, right?
Math and science, I mean, they're so important to what we get taught in schools and things like that. I mean, I guess you would like to think that perhaps this is something that begins to get pushed on to younger folks, how to deal with credit at this point.
Checkbook math, a great class that everyone should take. And I have a couple tips if anybody's listening to this and has credit card debt and they didn't tell the person sitting next to them about it. You can get a zero interest credit card. They still exist.
Zero interest credit
APR.
card.
Yeah, you can still get one. You have to have decent to good credit. But if you've got any kind of good credit rating, a pretty good credit rating, you can get a zero APR credit card. And it's often for a term of maybe a year and a half, that anything you put on that card is zero interest, which is free borrowing, basically. And so what you do is, and I'm not the only, I mean, every expert who knows this stuff recommends this. You transfer the balance off of the really high card onto the zero interest credit card, where the interest stops accumulating. And then you just pay it off as aggressively as you possibly can for those 16 or 20 months. And you can bring the balance down, man, $400 a month, pure principal, no interest, $500 a month. And next thing you know, it's dropping by thousands of dollars. It's an amazing tool for bringing your credit card debt down. And the only trick is it eventually is going to revert to the real credit card rate, which is going to be very high. So you have to get as much of it paid off as possible before that happens.
If you're interested in looking at or reading some of these pieces, you can check them out on thehill.com. Daniel, tell us about some of the other things that you write for them.
Well, I have a story up today that says that more of us than maybe ever, or more of us than in the past, believe in UFOs. And the reason for UFOs, I think it's because the government has kind of officially acknowledged that they're studying UFOs, and we've heard some pretty credible testimony about UFOs recently. So if you look at like Gallup surveys, there's an increasing group of Americans who are ready to say, okay, maybe there are UFOs that might have alien origins. So that's my latest story. It's up today on the Hill.
All righty. Daniel, appreciate your time, sir. Thank you so much. Daniel Visè from The Hill, staff writer from thehill.com. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. For Daniel, I am Manny Diaz. This has been another Sunday Conversation right here on Big Country Politics. We'll see you next week.